Okay, so I said in a previous video that I would introduce you to my new plane, 7878 Yankee, my F33a Bonanza. So let's go ahead and introduce you. So this is a 91 F33a. It's a four-seater, so four-seater Bonanza. It's got the Osborne tip tanks, which I never thought I wanted, but now that I have them on this, I have to admit they're pretty cool. Holds a lot of gas. Has an IO 550 Continental engine. As I mentioned in a previous video, it is at TBO. The compressions are kind of weak. It still runs well and doesn't use oil, so it's not like in dire straits, but I did order a 550 for it, so we'll step up to the 550 whenever that's in. And it's a fantastic performing plane. Like I said, it holds a lot of gas, 120 gallons total, 40 in each wing, and 20 in each of the tips. 114 of that would be usable. So it holds a lot of gas. You actually need the gas not so much to feed it, but for ballast. So if anyone has done any research on these 33 Bonanzas, they have some real tricky aft CG issues. You got to be really careful with them, but something to keep in mind, and I didn't realize this until I picked it up. They tend, so their CG moves backwards as you burn gas. The more gas you have in it, it holds it forward, because you could see that the tanks are kind of at the main wing spar. So the pilot has to get in first, and hopefully you don't put much baggage. Huge baggage compartment back here that you can't really use, so that's unfortunate. But because of the aft arm, you can't put too much weight back there. And I don't know if it'll demonstrate it here because it's got a lot of gas in it and nothing in the back. But when you step on the load here, the whole tail dips back, and it feels, especially if you have some baggage in the back or something, it feels like it's going to whack the tail, and they can. If you load them like heavy baggage and then you step on there and you're hefty like me, tricky. There's some things you can do to mitigate it, but overall it is it's something you need to be aware of on these 33 Bonanzas. You can get a heavier prop, so someday maybe I'll get a Hartzell. That prop was recently overhauled. It looks brand new, so I didn't feel the need. You can take some weight out of the back. So in the back, in the tail section, you have the older avionics. So this is mostly original avionics, and there's a bunch of stuff, probably 15 pounds worth of equipment in the tail section that you can remove if you go to modern avionics, okay, with LCD stuff. So I'll do that at some point. I don't need to do that immediately. My family is small. So here you can see the inside. It's relatively roomy. I would say maybe a little bit more roomy than the Aero that I was used to flying. You see this one has a 530 WAS GPS. It's got a 345 transponder, and it's got the Flight Stream Bluetooth connection from Garmin, which I found to be awesome. Actually, it coordinates your flight plan info between your iPad and your GPS, and you of course get all your ADS-B info as well. But you can see that the six-pack is original. It has the Bendix King system, which is fancy for its day. I do need to probably swap out the HSI or some component in there. It's a little slow and sticky sometimes. But other than that, everything, it has a 150 KFC 150 autopilot, which works beautifully. And you know, the interior for 30 years old, this is original. This plane is all original. Doesn't look too shabby, actually. It's got about 1,700 hours on the plane, which again, pretty low time for a 30-year-old plane. Okay, here we go. This is the IO 520. This is the original motor in here. This plane also has a backup alternator, which is nice. 24-volt system. Um, has some nice features to it. Also has backup pressure system. So it's, you know, I can't say enough. It uses maybe a quart in 7 hours, which is perfectly fine. But the compressions are weak. It's a little weak. On the way back from Houston, we flew it up to about almost 12,000 feet. And it did that fine, and we were doing 170 something knots. But you know, it was anemic. It was a hot day too, so density altitude is probably like 14,000 or something, maybe more, probably more. I think it was about a 100-degree day on the ground. But it was a little anemic. It climbs pretty well, but I think it'll be a lot better once we get the engine. It'll do mid 170s if you flog it. I think I'm gonna fly it Lena Peak. It'll still do probably 165 or so, maybe a little less Lena Peak. But that's probably burning, you know, 14 gallons an hour or less, which isn't bad. I've actually been, I was playing with it. I leaned it out and backed it off, and I was burning about 10 gallons an hour doing 135 knots, which is basically my aero. So I do like the ability to kind of adjust it. If you don't need to get somewhere fast, you know, you can just lean it out and pull it back and do 135 knots and burn similar fuel to an Aero or an Archer. Or you can put everything forward and, you know, 17, 18 gallons an hour or something like that, and you can get it up in the mid 170s. I've read that with the 550 it'll do 180 plus. We'll see. But it's a beautifully flying plane, very nimble. I mean, compared to the Aero, where you kind of feel like you're driving a dump truck. This is just, you know, light touches on the controls and in flight, and it's great. A little tricky for IFR. I haven't like flown actually, but I've done some approaches because it's so touchy with its control dynamics. You know, obviously in instrument you're on approaches or something, you want to be steady. So it has a nice autopilot though, and if you're on top of it, it's fine. The speed is something I needed to get used to. The first few landings I was doing with my instructor, I needed dual time obviously for insurance purposes, I was going too fast. You put the nose down on this thing, it'll pick up speed very quickly, and I was cooking in at, you know, 180 knots, trying to get down into the pattern, and that's not what we want to do. Things happen very quickly. So yeah, if you can, and obviously if you're on an IFR plane or something, there's some things out of your control, but if you can, you want to start dialing it back pretty early, get slowed up. So that's what I've been learning, getting better. I'll say this thing lands great. I've been really impressed with the way it lands. Probably better than the Aero. I thought that I could land the Aero well. I liked the way it landed, but this thing, once you get the speeds right, this thing lands like a peach. And this is original paint and everything. So looking forward to flying this around the country with the family. I've got a small family of 4, so it should work out great.